Welcome to Local Voices, a community podcast produced by the Echo newspaper, which takes a deep dive into the news that matters the most to you. I'm your host, Hayden Moore. If you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, please know that you can watch the video iteration on the Echo newspaper's YouTube channel. Likewise, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm delighted to tell you that there is an exclusive audio-only podcast available on echo.ie/podcasts and all good streaming platforms. So, we're hosting a virtual roundtable discussion this week with three local elected representatives about three core issues that have been covered in the news over the past few weeks in the Echo newspaper and in other publications. So, stay tuned as the councillors discuss the proposed development at Newlands Farm, antisocial behaviour and period poverty. Now, let's introduce our guests. People Before Profit Councillor Madeleine Johansson, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Fianna Fáil Councillor Charlie O'Connor, thanks for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
And lastly, Independent Councillor Liam Sinclair, delighted to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks.
Brilliant. I suppose just to get straight into it, because we have tons to get through today, as per usual. One of the biggest stories this week was that Little Ireland announced an initiative to help tackle period poverty, where essentially they're going to be giving out free period products in conjunction with Homeless Period Ireland. It's quite groundbreaking, and they are claiming that they're the first major retail in the world to do this. Councillor O'Connor, I want to cut straight to the chase with this. This has brought a sharp focus to the issue of period poverty again. And sure. I know the Scottish Parliament brought through a bill, I think it was November last year, to basically make it a legal right to have free access to sanitary products. What can you do as an elected rep to implement something of this scale kind of across the board, or at least even across South Dublin County?
Well, I think we all have an opportunity to get across to our national colleagues in Parliament how important this issue is. And I know it is in the current programme for government. And my sense is that should be accelerated as quickly as possible. So as that implementation will be possible. And my colleague Fiona O'Loughlin, who has been very active in the Shannon with other colleagues, cross-party, tells me that it is something that there's very strong all-party support for. And I absolutely agree with what you've said about Lidl and their initiative, and that should be applauded. My granddaughter, who talks to me about everything, and tells me that she's getting some reaction from people about this issue, saying that while it's great, while Lidl are to be applauded in a very special way about what they're doing, but questions need to be asked about why are they asking homeless people that they have to need smartphones or indeed the internet. And she tells me that in England, in the UK, Morrison's have a system, and I'm not promoting Morrison's, where you can go to the customer care and get the products. But, it's absolutely appalling that in this day and age, that so many people, so many women are suffering this kind of poverty for what is a very basic need and a very basic product. And I think all of us, and I would hope that we'd all agree that this is something that should be promoted and welcomed. And I'm certainly happy to do that.
It's a very good point you raised about the smartphones, I have to say. And Councillor Johansson, there was a study done by Plan International, I think it was a few years ago now, and found that almost 50% of girls aged between 12 and 19 in Ireland found it difficult to pay for sanitary products. And I know New Zealand are going to start offering free period products in schools this summer. I think it is after a trial period last year. Do you think that this is something that kind of needs attention very rapidly and specifically in schools and as soon as possible?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I think it does actually, and I think it is particularly an issue for young women, for girls who are in schools who don't have a lot of money, and particularly obviously girls from families that are from disadvantaged areas, who are living in poverty, where there might not be much money in the family, and the embarrassment around asking for money for period products is something that is obviously a barrier for a lot of young women and girls. And so providing that in schools, I think would be a very, very good first step. But then I think the Irish government has to follow what they've done in Scotland and other places where these products should be provided for free. They are an absolutely essential product. You can't, as a woman, live without them, and so they should really be provided for free to anyone. And I think, to be fair, the council have done some good work in terms of providing period products in the public toilets in County Hall and in the Clondalkin council offices, etc., which I think is really good. It's a good first step to do that, but I think this needs to be talked about more, and I think it's great at the moment actually that people are talking about it. I think it's something that in the past was never talked about, and in Ireland in particular, though I'm obviously from Sweden, where maybe these things were talked about a bit more than here, but the history in this country around women's issues in particular obviously is not the best. And so I think it's great to see that things are moving on. We're talking about these things, and now it's up to the government to implement this, to make sure that all period products are available for free for any woman who needs them.
That's a good point actually that you brought up about the disparity there between Sweden and here. Would you have found that there's the level of stigma is nowhere near as high in Sweden as it would be here for even just young girls, just even trying to start talking about something like that?
Yeah, I think it's much more open. Obviously, you have more you have more sex education in schools, and like we had like visits to we have youth clinics in Sweden where like it's outside of a hospital setting, so you can go if you're under 20 years of age. It's free. You can go if you have any issue whatsoever, but obviously particularly related to sexual issues. So if you're a young person, you can just go there and get advice and get help, get whatever you need. And I think Ireland is very much behind when it comes to looking after young people, and particularly around sexual issues and stuff like that. So there's a lot to do here, I think.
Councillor Sinclair, I know, as Councillor Johansson mentioned there, the council did launch an initiative in 2018 to provide sanitary products in the public spaces there, and that was a great step. And this little initiative is a good step as well. But like, what can the next step be? Because as Charlie mentioned there, and Councillor Johansson, these products are a necessity. Would you consider bringing something like this before the council about kind of starting an initiative in local schools or even local workplaces?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think the council have demonstrated that it is doable, and now that that's been demonstrated, there's no reason for the state not to step in and support that. Like a directive to councils around the country to have public buildings everywhere providing these. The Department of Education supporting schools, providing them there, and any support. Like it could be as simple as them being available in any government building, because they're everywhere. There's Garda stations and social welfare offices everywhere, and it could be very easily done through them with the support of the state. And look, it's an easy win. There's absolutely no reason for government not to do this. There's nobody is against it, and it will only make people's lives better. So look, whatever the answer is, I think my colleagues have gone over most of the things, and I agree with everything they've said. And now it's just a matter of deciding to do it and doing it.
Councillor O'Connor, just to bring you back in, sorry, logistically
Sure.
speaking, doing something like that, like implementing a plan in schools in South Dublin County, logistically, would that be very tough, or what do you think? Because I know obviously you have a budget every year, don't you? But that would obviously have to be included in it.
Well, I think it's about getting that message across, and that's the role of public representatives in raising issues. And very often, and my colleagues might be saying this, we all raise issues at the council which may be not as relevant as other issues, and this one is very important. And Madeleine made a very important point about there was a time, you know, when we didn't talk openly about some of these issues. And I remember way back when my granddaughter was dealing with this issue for the first time. She was telling me one day about her tummy giving her trouble, and I remember, and I hope she's not watching this, but she said to me, I can't really tell you what it's about. And I remember telling her, I was reared with 4 sisters, and I know these things. And I think that was true. But Madeleine is right. We didn't always talk about it. And it's good that we talk about it, because all of us in public life deal with people, certainly homeless people, and certainly homeless women, who are asking us these issues. And I know I made reference earlier on to the various debates in Leinster House, and I know a lot of praise was heaped on the Homeless Period Ireland organisation, which really has stepped out of its way to get this positive message across. And there's no, like, I came from a generation, where we waited with bated breath in school for the sort of annual sex education talk by our teacher, and then we came out wondering what that's about. And all these years later, some people tell me that they don't hear enough of this discussion and conversation. And I think Madeleine has made that point in our schools. And that's something that we should be progressive about. That is something we should be, it's normal conversation. It's normal life. And period poverty is a serious issue, and it shouldn't be hidden under the table. Absolutely not.
Of course. I know actually a few years ago, your beloved Shamrock Rovers partnered up with Homeless Period Ireland to bring sanitary products into the female bathrooms, didn't they?
That's right.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Look, we'll move on. So I think we've kind of covered that quite well, and we'll go on to this one. Is something that the Echo have really kind of covered quite extensively over the past few months, since probably the turn of the year, and it's antisocial behaviour. And look, people are getting attacked. Gangs are binge drinking in public parks at night time, using these CO2 canisters, meeting up for prearranged fights, lighting benches on fire. The list goes on. Councillor Sinclair, look, I'm not saying this is all of Tallaght or Clondalkin or Lucan or Ballyfermot, but like, there is small pockets, and they are voluminous enough that for us to take notice that there is actually an issue. And I know recently you also said to me that this ends when society reopens, I suppose. But does it?
Well, maybe it doesn't end, but the sharp edge of it is surely going to come off, because I think a lot of what we're seeing at the moment is the claustrophobia that I think all of us, if not all of us, most of us for sure, are feeling. It showed at the small talk at the start of this conversation before we hit record that we didn't really have anything to say to each other, because all we've seen all the time are our direct family and the four walls of our house. And that does sit on you. And there are some people that don't have this. Some people can cope with that quite well, and some people can't. And in particular, young people are always going to be more impetuous than other people, and they're going to need to direct that energy somewhere. And where they may have had like things as simple as sports or an arcade or a leisure center or anything like that to go to, they now have nowhere, and they're doing exactly what I did when I was that age, and what people, the generation ahead of me, and what I imagine the next generation are going to do, where they roamed around. And occasionally when you roam around, you find trouble. And I think that is the key to this expansion of antisocial behaviour that we've been seeing here. And anecdotally, it's definitely not just Tallaght or Clondalkin or Lucan. It's countrywide. Like, you speak to our colleagues. I've been speaking to colleagues in Cork City Council, and it's the exact same thing is happening there. So look, we're not going to solve antisocial behaviour just by coming out the other end of this pandemic, but there is definitely a relationship to a lot of what we're seeing now, to the frustration that all of us are feeling. And like, the things that we've been talking about, and that we've been talking about in the Echo, and we've been talking about with our colleagues for sure in Tallaght, these are primarily the things that we are seeing with our own eyes, are being reported to us by residents that are seeing with their own eyes. There's very worrying upward trends in domestic violence, and that's very, very worrying. So it's just, we are going through a hard time as a society, and some of us are just not coping well with it. And that's not intended as a judgment on those people. That's for me. That's me saying that we need to find these people and support them. I don't know. We'll keep having the conversations. I don't know what the answer is, but being in touch with each other and being in touch with anyone that you know is struggling is certainly a first step.
Councillor Johansson, would you think that this is pandemic linked in a sense?
Well, I think some of it is. I mean, surely, I mean, the fact that there is nowhere, like literally at the moment, nowhere for young people to go, definitely has an impact. I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, I do think that when using the term antisocial behaviour, and I don't personally like to use it, actually, I think you have to be careful, because a lot of people will call something and say that something is antisocial behaviour when it's just young people hanging around. And I think there's a very, very big difference between young people just hanging around a corner or on the street or whatever, do you know what I mean? And actual criminal activity, and like drug related activity or whatever. And I think these two things are very different, and I think we have to be very careful about how we talk about these things and not lump them all into one thing. And therefore, because there is no solution to antisocial behavior like as such, you have to instead look at what is it that's happening in the community. Is it young people hanging around? Well, then that means that it's because they have nowhere to go. And even when, obviously, before the pandemic, that was the case, particularly in Lucan, where part of the constituency that I cover, where there is very little youth services, there's no places for young people to go, and they're going to hang around, you know, that's just a fact. And if there's none of those kind of places to go to, that's what's going to happen. But then, so that's one solution to dealing with that issue of young people hanging around, is giving them somewhere to go and something to do, and somewhere to socialize, because they don't necessarily want to be involved in like organized activities either. Like, so you need to give them somewhere safe to just hang around. But then if you look at drug issues, for example, then that needs to be tackled in a different way. And I personally think that we need to look at drug abuse as a health issue, not as a criminal issue, but it should be looked at from a health perspective. And if you started dealing with those things from a health perspective, rather than a criminal perspective, I think would go a long way to dealing with some of these type of issues.
Just actually on that point, you make a really good point about the criminal and the health approach to drugs. There was an article in the Sunday Independent last week or the week before, I think it was, and basically Ali Bracken got to speak to a mother from Tallaght who was a recovering crack cocaine addict, and that woman basically said something along the lines of that kids who are as young as 10 have been dealing crack cocaine and dealing drugs in the local area, and that the guards can't touch them because they're only 10, essentially. But like, is that the wrong approach? Should we be talking about, I'll put this to yourself, Councillor O'Connor, should we even be talking about trying to get kids who are 10 and prosecute them?
Well, I'm not so sure I have an easy answer to that. If you watched television last night, I think in County Louth, the guards went out and were talking to young people about the dangers that they're having presented every day. And we know in Tallaght that's happening as well. But I don't think, like, if it's okay to say, I think a discussion about antisocial behaviour has to be more broad than that, in the sense that we've always had antisocial behaviour, not just before the lockdowns, not just before the pandemic. And there's various forms and categories, if you like, of antisocial behaviour. And not all the categories involve young people. I know we're talking young people so far, but there's a lot of other types of antisocial behaviour which impact on our communities and which cross our desks all the time. For example, on Monday next, the Tallaght Area Committee under the chairmanship of Liam will deal with a report about antisocial behaviour over the last year or so. And it's amazing to look at the kind of things that have crossed their desk. Drugs activity, certainly crimes being reported to the council, joyriding, violence and intimidation and harassment, which I suppose is drugs related. And then all sorts of other vandalism and physical condition of property. People, for example, spending time putting graffiti in Tallaght Village, for example. I take that as antisocial behaviour, fairly serious antisocial behaviour. But I think both my colleagues have referred to the extra challenges which the pandemic has presented. And certainly there's no question in my mind that has added to what I'll gently call the gathering of young people, which has been brought to our attention all the time. And there's loads of examples, and I don't really want to highlight too many areas in a very negative way. But for example, the newly constructed sports pavilion in Albon, which we all support, and which is a great facility. Like we've been getting, Liam and I and others of the Tallaght reps have been getting all sorts of reports and complaints about young people gathering there, and indeed adults gathering there, particularly at the weekend, and adding to issues of drinking, issues of drugs, and so on. So it's a very broad subject, antisocial behaviour. And by the way, I take the view, without being too conservative about it, that antisocial behaviour, needs Garda activity to be dealt with. And we get calls about people saying, should we go out ourselves and sort it out? No, they shouldn't. Law and order is a matter for the guards, and I think it's very important that we make that point. But there's always been issues of antisocial behaviour, but the lockdown has added to it. And young people, I think it was Madeleine that said it, that young people are certainly gathering in greater groups than they used to. And Liam won't mind me saying so that in Kingswood, in recent weeks, there's been a lot of difficulties, of antisocial behaviour, and indeed beyond, with young people gathering and being joined by young people from outside the area and so on. So it is an issue, and it does upset people, and communities shouldn't have to tolerate it, quite frankly.
Councillor Johansson, I just want to go back to you there briefly, because just on something that Councillor O'Connor said about it needs Garda activity, essentially, it needs law and order, needs to be approached that way. What do you make of that?
I disagree on that, I have to say. I think a law and order type of approach to these issues has not worked. I have not seen anywhere where that type of approach has worked. On the other hand, there are examples from other countries, in places in America, in particular in New York and other places, where they've taken a different approach to all sorts of matters, actually, but particularly in relation to, like in New York, it was in particularly Black communities, where there was loads of issues with young people getting involved in gang-related crime and all that kind of stuff. And they actually found if they had people from the community who were not police officers, who were not involved in law and order, but actually community workers going out and talking to these young people, they actually got more of a result than they did by just sending cops out on the streets. So actually we need to look at these things completely differently, I think, and talk about a community-led response to these things, not as individuals. That's not what I'm saying, but as communities, community organizations, all that stuff. And the people who work with young people, we need to put loads more money into resourcing youth services, etc., so that they can actually fund outreach workers who can go out and talk to these young people and give them alternatives, give them other things to do. And of course, it's very worrying when you have young people and children dealing drugs, and it's happening everywhere, and it's happening in some of the areas that I represent as well. And but I just don't think a law and order approach is going to work. You have to ask yourself, why are these young people doing this? Why are children doing that? And you have to look at poverty and inequality in society as well as part of what drives young people to do these things. And if you don't tackle those underlying causes, you're never going to be able to deal with the effects. So you have to start looking at the causes rather than just trying to basically put a plaster on a gaping wound.
That's actually something you mentioned there about the community-led response and bringing community workers in to kind of work with the kids where they're at, essentially. I was walking through my estate about 3 weeks ago, I think it was, and I'm sure you have seen these expended CO2 canisters absolutely all over the place. And on this particular day, they were scattered everywhere, and it was the most I'd seen ever in like the past couple of years. And I realized then, like, as there was like a group of kids, I'd say they were all about 10, no more than 10, definitely not more than 10. They were all just like on their bikes, sitting on them. And there was one boy who was picking up all these canisters, and he was holding them up to his mouth, like holding one up to his mouth one at a time, and absolutely broke my heart, like really broke my heart. And one of his friends starts saying to him about, I think he starts explaining how like they're drugs and how people put them in balloons and inhale them. Like, that's heartbreaking to see. Like, these kinds of, like, sorry to digress. I'll bring yourself in on this, Councillor Sinclair.
I'd like to go back and do.
Sorry, I'll bring you in there, Councillor O'Connor. Sorry, like that.
No,
like when you,
okay. Like, I think what Madeleine said in contrast, I said that's worth debate. And like, my last real job before politics was working for the youth service, so I understand the need for that kind of approach. And I wasn't suggesting, that the guards go bursting in every time. But if you talk to communities about young people gathering and drinking and being approached by people who are clearly selling drugs, and people defacing properties and breaking windows and gathering. There was a stabbing in Liam's estate several weeks ago when people were gathering. And like, that is law and order. There's no point in saying that we don't need law and order, because the people in the communities where they see the law being broken believe that has to be dealt with at that level. Madeleine also said, I have put in the next council meeting already about the need for the council to look at facilities for young people and helping young people, because that's what we should be doing. And like, I came from Crumlin, where that was always said that young people had nothing to do. And it's sad state of affairs that now in Tallaght, in Clondalkin and Lucan and so on, it's been articulated in this conversation that there is a need to find facilities and find places for young people to gather properly. And mind you, and I want to be careful how I say this, but there are facilities in some of our estates which are not being used to the optimum. They're closed all day, and they should really be made available to young people if we want to deal with the issue and give young people a place to gather in safety.
I feel like it's so multifaceted. Like, there's so many dimensions to it. Obviously, there has to be a level of law and order that approach to this in a sense when it does get totally out of control. But for people on the ground, and you're seeing all these things happening on a day-to-day basis, and it's so disheartening, it's so heartbreaking.
Sure.
It's hard to kind of, like, obviously the guards have been around forever, and you see the guards coming into the estate, and you still don't see a whole lot being done, because obviously the guard resources aren't there.
Sure. So,
like, in terms of supporting communities, how do you, like, these kids are slipping through the cracks still today, and like, even I don't know if that's even anything to do with the pandemic. Like, these are issues that have been going on for a long time. Councillor Sinclair, where do you, like, because you see this happening every day, don't you?
Well, it's quieting down here, thankfully. We did have a bit of a spike there recently, but it seems to have leveled out. Look, I don't disagree with what either of my colleagues have said, but I do think that the priority should be in prevention. So investing in community services and in ensuring that there are facilities and places for young people to go should absolutely be the priority. Because if we're going to get to the point where we are sicking the guards on people, my question is, what did you do to prevent that? What did you do to prevent that escalation? And at the moment, I don't think our answer is strong enough, and it's something that we need to pull our socks up on and get more done. And like, I hope we will. I've lived here nearly 12 years, and in that time we have gotten 2 new play spaces for younger children, and there is plans for a teen space here as well, so that's definitely an improvement. And very, very lucky with the residents and the residents association that we have here, that they were very positive about these facilities coming up. I know a lot of people have issues with them because young people are going to gather there, but that's what they're for. So I'm glad that people were welcoming of them here, and more things like that which are planned. We do have a lot of teen spaces due to be rolled out in the next couple of years, and more play spaces, but even more than that, we need we need staffing in community centres so that if people just, like as Madeleine said earlier, somewhere for people to go, that it's not actually structured thing. Like sports is great for certain people, but I was never interested in doing sports. So just somewhere for people to go that doesn't cost money, that is supervised, or maybe supervised is the wrong word, but somebody there that can, supervise is the only word I can think of. But,
yeah, no, you raised some good points. You really do. I don't know if anyone else wants to come back in on that just before we wrap up.
Yeah, no, I was just going to make a point on I suppose the nitrous oxide, because it's obviously a big issue and it's happening everywhere. And I think there needs to be some serious education programs in schools and stuff around nitrous oxide, dangers of nitrous oxide. And obviously it's maybe not the most dangerous drug people can take, but it has led to fatalities. It can cause basically, it can close up your airways, and you can basically you stop breathing basically. So it can be really, really dangerous. And there needs to be some education done around that. I mean, I knew people when I was younger who used them actually, like friends of mine and whatever. And but yeah, I think people don't know about the risks, and I think if you really educate young people about the risks of those things, I think that's the way to try and stop that from happening.
What do you think, Councillor O'Connor?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and we've had many situations where that has clearly been a problem. Indeed, a young man from Tallaght died, and it was said that that's how he died. But I think it's very important that we understand, that there are issues, and this conversation about antisocial behaviour has focused mainly on young people, and just to finally make that point in regard to that antisocial behaviour that crosses our desks is not just about young people. But I will make another point, which we made about the progress that the council has made with the promptings of the councillors with regard to teen space and facilities, and still. In Tallaght Central, which Liam and I represent, we have had estates association saying, no, thank you very much. We don't want a teen space here. And okay, that was their decision, and I'm not querying them for doing that. But that shows the challenge when the local authority wants to provide facilities and bodies of residents decide, no, we don't, as Liam said, we don't want people gathering, therefore we don't want those facilities. So, that's another argument.
I think all the points that you've all made is kind of, we need all agencies kind of coming together on this, working with communities. And yeah, we'll move on again. So this is the final topic of today. I want to spend a little bit extra time on this one. So there's a stretch of greenbelt that runs between Tallaght and Clondalkin. A real estate investment trust, Hibernia REIT, owns this 144-acre site. They recently revealed their development plans if the site gets rezoned for residential use. The Echo does understand that the developer, subject to rezoning and planning permission, are planning to build over 3,500. Let me emphasize that 3,500 units, just to be a mix of housing and apartments, essentially. We couldn't possibly go over the entire proposed development in the time that we have, but that's it kind of in a snapshot. I'm going to ask you all actually at the end, just if you support this proposed development, but I want to raise some of the core concerns that residents have with yourselves, just one by one. So I'll start with yourself, Councillor O'Connor. There is a concern that there is not adequate transport infrastructure in place around the neighbouring Kingswood Heights estate around there to support this development. You've obviously heard that yourself with people calling.
Oh, absolutely. And there is an issue. Like, for example, we all applauded the coming of Lewis to Tallaght, which gave us all an opportunity to go into the city if we so wished, and to allow people come out to enjoy the facilities out here, to go to the hospital, to go to the square, to go to the council, to go to the Tallaght Stadium, and so on. So that was positive. And still we're finding at the moment, even before what might happen in the greenbelt, that there's huge pressure on our public transport, on Lewis and on the bus service. And for example, Liam and I on the Tallaght Area Committee have been dealing with issues relating to City West, where there's a huge explosion of development of apartments and so on. And people all along the line in Fettercairn, down to Bellegarde, down to Kingswood, are telling us that by the time the Lewis reaches them, it's fallen anyway. So that's something to take account of. Well, would you just give me a second to make a point that I did want to make, other than the question you've asked?
Absolutely.
The Echo have been, keeping us fairly well up to date with all sides of the argument, with excellent coverage. But I just want to point out, if you read yesterday's Echo, and I read the Echo every single Thursday, and on page 4 yesterday, there was an article, 2 sports clubs reach agreement with the developer. Okay, you have it. Okay, so flick forward now, Hayden, to page 28, where the famous Echo letters page has a headline, 100% against greenbelt land proposed development. Now, somebody rang me and said to me, did you read page 4? I did. And you see sports clubs are saying yes. Well, that's what they appear to be saying. And by the way, they sent us all a letter this morning confirming that on behalf of St. Killian's GA Club in Kingswood. And they have set up a new committee, Newlands Farm Kingswood Heights Sports Committee. But I'm making the point, if you look at that headline, you would think, and this was pointed out to me, as I'm sure it was to Liam, does that mean everybody's against the development because page 4 suggests otherwise? So there is that sort of tension existing, and I know the Residents Association, and I would applaud the efforts of the Residents Association. Of course they're concerned, and they need to keep on top of this issue. Liam and I and other councillors from Tallaght Central went to a meeting with Kingswood Heights Residents Association, and I said to them on the night that they need to take ownership of this issue and make sure that the public representatives who will have a vote in the development plan are clear about what the local people are saying to us. And as I said, we did get a different message this morning in correspondence from the 2 clubs. So we need to hear from the community what they're asking us to do as public representatives.
Of course. I suppose one of the other core kind of issues is just the fact that that they want to rezone it in general. And I'll put that to yourself, Councillor Johansson. This is something that, from even speaking to that association myself, to the Kingswood Heights Residents Association, that it's actually in their constitution that land was always going to be agriculture land. But have you had, I don't know, what's your take on that issue in particular with the rezoning, just generally? Have you got any issues with that?
The rezoning, you see, I think there are a number of issues with what Hibernia Reid want to do with the land, right? And I think there's a lot of issues with all this, right? So first is obviously that this is a private developer. They're interested in building housing for profit, not for the needs of people, because we do need housing, but that is not what these people are interested in doing. Then, of course, you have the issue of the zoning. It's currently zoned as agricultural, and obviously Hibernia Reid wants it rezoned. They've been wanting it rezoned for a while. We know that since they bought the land basically from the RFU a few years ago. So on the zoning, right, because there would be, obviously, they argue that this is a good place in terms of national planning policy, the national planning framework, etc., that it's near to the Lewis, it's near to transport, and therefore near to the M50, all that kind of stuff, and therefore housing should be built here as part of the kind of compact growth strategy of the national planning framework. However, you have and part of that is correct. And I think obviously near, particularly I suppose near to the Lewis, I would think that you could possibly put some residential units there. You know, I don't think that would necessarily be the worst idea in the world. However, I think it's problematic when you're looking at the greenbelt, and I know Liam's letter that he wrote to the Echo some time ago obviously talks about biodiversity, and I think that's really important, and that this is the kind of the last stretch of green land, I suppose, between Clondalkin and Tallaght, and I think that I certainly wouldn't be in favour of rezoning all that land for residential. I wouldn't, you know. I think we need to consider particularly the biodiversity issue very, very carefully, particularly in this development plan. I think we're all very, very conscious of climate change, of the issues that we're facing in terms of the climate emergency, and what we can do to stop that from happening, and that there are other places that are already zoned as residential, like in Clonburris, the rest of Adamstown, where there's a huge amount of zoned land for residential use, that I think we should start by building there, and particularly around Clonburris, around the railway station and stuff. I mean, that's where we need to put in housing, you know, where there's the train is not great, and there's obviously issues there, but it is going to get better when the electrification of that line happens in the near future. Hopefully transport will improve in that area, and that's where we should build primarily. That's kind of how I feel about it, and of course, so there's loads of layers, I think, to this issue, and it's not a simple one. But and then of course the community needs to have a say in this and all that stuff as well, on top of all that I've already said. But I think the biodiversity thing is really key here.
Okay, Councillor Sinclair, I want to put it to you this way, actually, about the infrastructure, the traffic infrastructure in particular in the area. One of the lads in the Echoes was saying to me before we came on air that all you see up in City West is hard hats, and that it was chock-a-block, bumper to bumper traffic. That's literally exactly word for word what you said to me. Do you think the traffic situation up there, in particular in City West, is something that needs to be kind of learned from, with maybe planning developments like a Newlands farm? Should that go ahead, say?
Yeah, we can learn from City West. We can learn from a lot of parts of Lucan, and I'm sure we could all name off other places where dense development was done too quickly without proper infrastructure being put in place. So it's definitely something that you have to look at if you are going to put a lot of units in one place. They have to be serviced by good transport infrastructure. And as Charlie said there, the Lewis is at or near capacity. Back in the olden days when we used to actually go to a physical office to work, the Lewis was how I got there. I'm getting on at Kingswood. I'm getting on usually between 7 and 7:30 in the morning. And you would be doing well to get a seat at Kingswood. You are absolutely not going to get a seat after Kingswood, and you're not getting on it like at James's Hospital or Houston. It's a fight to get onto that Lewis. And with all the developments that are happening in City West and all the planned developments in Tallaght, up in Cookstown, this possible one in Newlands Farm, the Lewis is always mentioned, and the Red Cow will become Houston Station if they all go ahead. You just won't be able to get onto it. That's a resolvable issue. There is capacity on that line for more Lewises. It's just a matter of, and I've spoken to Minister Ryan of Transport about this, and we're keen as councillors in South Dublin and in Tallaght to get the capacity of that line increased. But until such a time as there are any concerns that are had over infrastructure are valid. And I want to touch on points that both Madeleine and Charlie had made. Charlie said that not everybody is against this, and that is worth stressing, because I think we tend to find the people that are on our side and take that as everybody's voice. And as to the sports clubs, and they have gone on the record with all councillors that they want this to go ahead because certain infrastructure has been promised for them. And now I think there's some some very recent examples in Tallaght with the Cuckoo's Nest and the Belgard Inn, where developers say they're going to do something and it just doesn't happen. That's always going to be a risk with these sorts of guys. And even if they did build these facilities, would it be enough to take the extra capacity that all these extra units would? I'm not so sure that it would, because they are talking about a very dense building, which is how we build houses nowadays. We can't build houses like we did in the 70s, where we all get a bit of a garden and all. Compact growth is the way to go. So I'm dubious about that. We also have people in Kingswood are contacting me. They are either adults with their adult children in their house with them, or adults that are still in their parents' house, and they've got families of their own. So we've got 3 generations in these houses that were not designed to have 3 generations in them. They don't want to move away from their families, and why would they? I don't want to move away from my family, and they would like nearby options nearby. Again, to Councillor Johansson's point, will Hibernia REIT provide affordable housing? I'm not really so sure. I think that they'll provide units for vulture funds to charge €2,500 per month to working people, which is essentially their entire salaries, at least, sometimes even more than that. And to touch on the biodiversity, like it really is. Like I often use the fact that I live there as and point at it that I live. It's pretty much, it's right over there. I can walk to it in 5 minutes if I wanted to, but it's more, you just look at this on a map and you can see how important a piece of land this is, because it is beside 2 of the busiest roads in Ireland, in the Naas Road and the M50, and between 2 of the most densely populated areas in Ireland, in Clondalkin and Tallaght. Those are areas that are only getting more densely populated. We need this bit of green, and not only that, we need to develop it. We need to wet parts of it. We need to get more trees up there. We need this to be sucking up the amount of carbon that is going into the air around that area, because you can feel the difference in the air between here and 20 minutes up the road in Old Bawn, where the air is it's fresher there. It's easier to breathe, which is insane given how close we are. So we need that bit of green land. And I know we need housing as well, and that's something that we as councillors and we public representatives of any type have to be working on, but it can't be at the expense of our environment. It absolutely can't. And if I have any say in it, it won't be. So I think it needs to stay green. It is key green infrastructure, and I hope that we can all really work together to keep it as such, and not just let the people who have all the money get their way once again, because Hibernia REIT, if they don't get their way here, they'll be just fine. They have plenty of other stuff. So thanks.
Hibernia REIT confirmed actually that they would spend 8 million on the community and sporting infrastructure in the area, just on points that the couple of you made there. The first part is a new multi-purpose and multi-code sports hub comprising of a pavilion and all-weather pitches. There's a story in the Echo, as Charlie mentioned, about St. Kevin's Killian's GA Club and Kilnamanagh FC reaching an agreement. It's for 999-year leases at €1 per annum. Should it go ahead, essentially. The second part is the full restoration of Catherine Tynan House to be a cultural hub and a centre, essentially. I was out there at the land myself a couple of weeks ago doing a podcast, and it's absolutely beautiful, especially Catherine Tynan House. I'm in awe of the place. But a major concern of residents is that essentially the developers buy and support with these sports clubs and with the culture hub through the development. And I had Mick Duff on the podcast a few weeks ago, and he basically said that over his dead body would he be supporting this development. To bring yourself in, Councillor O'Connor, would those specific things, the sports hub and the cultural hub, tip the scales in favour of you supporting this development?
Well, like it'll be tempting for some in regard to that. And you mentioned the Catherine Tynan House. Like I've taken a particular interest in that over the years. And if I tell you this, don't tell anybody. I actually quietly accessed the site myself. A short while ago, I went in and had a look, and I am interested because as somebody who came to Tallaght with an employer over 50 years ago, I'm very clear, as others are, that Tallaght didn't fall out of the sky 50 years ago. That it has its own history, its own heritage, and the Catherine Tynan House is part of that. And okay, once again, it'll be tempting that efforts are being made by the company to renovate and to redevelop that house. And I know they got a grant from government in recent times under heritage grants to do some of that work. And that is something like they have been, and I'm not promoting them, by the way, but I'm just stating facts that they, in their most recent newsletter, they had an endorsement and testimony from the Tallaght Historical Society, who've also taken a particular interest in that. So, you know, there are a lot of issues flying around as far as this matter is concerned. And I think Liam makes a fair point that it is the only last remaining green belt really in the Tallaght area. And you know, it's important that aspect will be considered. But we also have to understand that a company who have spent the guts of 40 million on acquiring this land from the IRFU, who are to benefit more, they are not going to go away. And that's why they are attempting to reach out to the community. And as Mick Duff has put on the record more than once, you know, that we as local councillors are asking the local community, particularly through Kingswood Heights Residents Association, is this what you want? And in fairness, and I think Liam has said it, they have been clear thus far in the situation. But, you know, this is going to develop a little bit more. And as you've said yourself, and it has been highlighted in the Echo, that other interests are saying we are in favour of this. And that kind of pressure is going to come on the local councillors, particularly the Tallaght Central councillors, and then moving out to all the other councillors, and all 40 of us in South Dublin County Council will have a voice as far as the development plan voting is concerned. So that's where we're at. As of now, as I'm telling people who are contacting me, there is no proposal before the council.
Right.
People are telling me that there are, but there aren't. And until those motions are sought from members, that remains the situation.
Right. Would you, just to push you on that a little bit, Charlie, would you support it in its current form?
I don't know. And Mick Duff, Liam Sinclair and others told the Residents Association that we are not in favour of rezoning the land. And I'm not clarifying that by saying there are other issues which have come into the debate recently, and even today alone, where a body of residents have asked us effectively to support it. But all these matters will have to be considered. All these matters will be subject to debate, and we will have to see what motions emerge.
Okay. Councillor Johansson, would you be, like, I know obviously Hibernia rates still have to, like, before they will have to seek planning permission to restore Catching House in particular, and should the councillors back the plans. And as Councillor O'Connor pointed out, nothing is before the council yet. But would you be supporting this proposed development?
Not as it stands, as in what Hibernia Rate have proposed. Did you get me there? Was I frozen?
No.
Oh, you weren't frozen.
Right.
But never say that about you.
Okay. Concise, to the point. Do you want to expand on that at all, Councillor Johansson?
Well, I suppose it's kind of what I said. I mean, I think I think first of all, obviously, we don't have anything before us as of yet, and all that I can comment on is what I've seen from Hibernia Rate, and I wouldn't be in favour of what they are currently proposing in terms of particularly the loss of the biodiversity. That's
okay. Brilliant. I'll give you the last word, Councillor Sinclair, because I know you live in the area. You've dealt with this with the residents, as you said, and nothing's before the council yet. But if you were deciding, would you be in favour of the proposed development in its current form?
I'm opposed to it being rezoned.
Okay, yeah.
And such time as that battle is won or lost, I will obviously evaluate any proposal that's put in front of me at face value. But to any councillors, like Charlie's obviously already been there, but Friday I take a day off from my day job and I try my very best to stay off my county council emails. If any councillor wants to come up and have a look at that land with me, because it is a stunning bit of land, it's so hard to believe that you're in the middle of Tallaght. Any Friday, give me a shout. Now you'll have to help me get a pram up over a hill, like, but we'll get it done, and it'd be worth having a look around that bit of land just to see how stunning it is and how valuable it could be if it was in the right hands and was used properly. That invite is out. You can all access my number or my email. So to all councillors, that invitation is extended, and I hope that a few anyway take me up on it.
Brilliant. Just on that point, Councillor Sinclair, I was out there myself for the podcast. If anyone wants to check it out, it came out, I think it was two episodes ago or 3 episodes ago. I went out and did a tour of the site, and it was absolutely gorgeous, and the amount of potential on that land is fantastic. Just from looking at it myself. But just to come back to you, Councillor Sinclair, just lastly, you said there that there's loads of potential there in terms of like maybe putting the wetlands in place and stuff like that. Would you suggest that maybe the land, like to Hibernia rate, that they push forward in trying to maybe think about it in a different way and put more things in place, such as wetlands or other items like that?
Well, as far as I know, they do have great plans for the biodiversity of that site. But as I said to their representatives, there's absolutely nothing that you can do for biodiversity on that site that you can't do better without also constructing on it. So, yeah, look, they know the right things to say. They're sound guys. They're very slick. And at the end of the day, look, they're just doing their job. They're not the enemy, and I hope they don't see me as theirs. But there is nothing that can be done on a site like that from a biodiversity and climate mitigation point of view that can't be done a lot better without also building.
Okay. Brilliant. I know we had a few technical difficulties throughout the show, and I do apologise to anyone watching or listening. But I do think we had a good debate, and we brought up some good points, and I hope you all felt that way as well. And I'd just like to say, Councillor Charlie O'Connor, Councillor Liam Sinclair, and Councillor Madeleine Johansson, thank you so much for coming on Local Voices. Thank you for listening to and watching Local Voices. If you haven't already, be sure to follow the show on a streaming platform of choice, or subscribe to the Echo newspaper on YouTube to never miss a minute.